All right, today we're diving straight into one of the most intense and, honestly, strangest moments in the entire book of Revelation. We're looking at chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. It's a scene filled with wild symbols and a really deep, kind of unsettling quiet that we need to unpack.
And this is the central mystery we're going to tackle. I mean, think about it. After 6 seals unleash total chaos, the 7th and final one is broken, and the response isn't some giant explosion, but just silence. Deafening silence. What in the world does that mean? Let's figure this out together.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. Back in chapter 5, there's this scroll in God's hand, locked up with 7 seals. And nobody is worthy to open it, except for the Lamb, who's Jesus. He starts breaking them one by one, and all these judgments are unleashed on the earth. But when he gets to that 7th and final seal, everything just stops.
Can you even imagine that? Heaven is always described as this place of constant sound, right? Endless praise, worship, angels singing, elders talking. And then, for what the text says is about half an hour, there's just nothing. A complete and total halt. It's that jarring contrast that makes you lean in and go, whoa, okay, what is happening here?
You know, this mysterious pause has had scholars scratching their heads for centuries, and they've come up with a bunch of theories, mostly by digging into the Old Testament to figure out what the author John was trying to get across. So, we're going to play detective and look at the 5 main possibilities.
Let's run through the clues. Some people think all the praise gets hushed so God can focus and hear the prayers of his people who are suffering on earth. Makes sense. Others think it's the silence of pure shock, as the cosmos finally gets who the slain lamb really is. A few have this really cool idea that it's a kind of symbolic decreation, a return to that silence before Genesis 1. Or maybe it's just a pause for dramatic effect, you know, like the quiet reverence in old temple rituals. But it's this 5th theory where the evidence really starts to pile up.
And this insight from scholar G.K. Beale is, I think, the key that unlocks the whole thing. He points out that all over the Old Testament, in books like Psalms, Isaiah, Habakkuk, silence is tied to the awesome, terrifying power of God's judgment. It's the quiet you get right before God acts in a huge, decisive way.
So here's the bottom line. This silence isn't empty. It's a response. The 7th seal is finally broken. The contents of that scroll, the final, most terrifying judgments, are at last revealed, and all of heaven just holds its breath in absolute, appalled awe. It's the collective, silent gasp at the sheer horror and scale of what's about to happen.
And this brings us to the next characters who step onto the stage. The moment the silence breaks, John sees 7 angels who are handed 7 trumpets. They're clearly here to do something big, but who are they?
Well, there are 2 main theories. One idea connects them to the 7 archangels that show up in other Jewish writings from that time. But honestly, a much more compelling idea comes straight out of the Old Testament. In Psalm 78, it describes the plagues in Egypt as being carried out by a company of destroying angels. Sound familiar?
And this link to the Exodus is so important. The trumpet judgments that are about to happen look a whole lot like the plagues of Egypt. So these angels aren't just some random powerful beings. No, they are agents of a new Exodus, signaling a final cosmic-level deliverance for God's people from their oppressors.
And the scene just keeps building from here. Another angel shows up at a golden altar, holding a golden censer. He's given incense, which he offers up with prayers, and then something really dramatic happens with fire. And get this little ritual isn't just for show. It's the very thing that triggers the judgment.
Now, to really get this, we have to know what incense meant back then. In the Old Testament temple, the sweet-smelling smoke from burning incense wasn't just potpourri. It was a physical symbol of prayers rising up to God and, more importantly, being heard and accepted by Him.
And that connects everything. The incense is mixed with the prayers of all the saints. Those are the cries for justice from people being persecuted down on earth. The message here is incredibly powerful. The apocalyptic judgment that's about to be unleashed is not some random act of divine anger. It is God's direct, decisive answer to the prayers of His people. Then the angel takes that same censer, the one that held the prayers, fills it with fire from the altar and just hurls it down to earth. And the result is immediate cosmic chaos, thunder, lightning, and earthquake. This imagery is meant to echo God's terrifying arrival at Mount Sinai, which is a huge signal that God Himself is now present and ready to act.
So, what is the whole point of all this terrifying imagery? The silence, the angels, the fire? It's all pointing toward one massive, central idea: God is hitting a cosmic reset button. And this isn't just about destruction, it's a process of decreation for the sake of recreation. The deep connection here is to the Old Testament ritual called the Day of Atonement. This was the one day a year when the high priest went into the most sacred part of the temple to purify it, symbolically scrubbing away all the sin and impurity. It was basically the ultimate annual reset for Israel, getting things back to their original, pristine state.
So this vision of the apocalypse actually follows a really clear logic. First, you have judgment, which deals a final blow to evil, just like the plagues did in Egypt. Second, that judgment leads to a decreation, where the old, broken world is taken apart. But, and this is key, third, out of that chaos, God starts a recreation, bringing forth a new, perfect order just like he did in the beginning. And the final goal, step 4, is a completely restored creation, a new Eden. And that brings us right back around to our central mystery, that silence in heaven. It's that profound half-hour pause when the full scope of God's incredible plan is finally revealed. It's the moment when everyone in the heavenly court finally understands that to get to the new Eden, the old world has to be unmade in this terrifying, painful, but ultimately hopeful process.
So this whole passage leaves us with a pretty profound idea to chew on. It shows judgment not as the end of the story, but as a necessary, agonizing step toward renewal. It describes a total reset. And the question it leaves us with is this: what does it truly mean for a world to be made new?